The Bucks fired Adrian Griffin. I'm blown away by this. They're 30-13. They're 3.5 games out of first place. Gang, only one team, the Boston Celtics, in the entire NBA has a better record. This is some Premier League stuff.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say it is shocking, but not surprising. I think it's where it comes. I mean, it was an open secret around the NBA that Adrian Griffin was on shaky ground in Milwaukee. But the fact that he's out when they're 30-13, not after some bad, run of play where they've lost a bunch of games in a row, and that Doc Rivers, who at least reportedly was an advisor to Griffin to try and help him as a rookie head coach succeed, decided the best advice to give was to fire Adrian Griffin. Now the Bucks push back on this and hire him is peak Doc Rivers. And Ash, I don't know where you come down on this. For me, look, there's two sort of worlds on this. For me, it's an utter disaster. I think Doc Rivers is a disaster of a head coach that is certainly shared by not everybody, but plenty of people around the NBA. The stats speak for themselves. Let me just rattle through them because I think it's amazing they hired this guy. There have been 13 teams that have been up 3-1 in an NBA 7-game playoff series and still lost. And 3 of them have been coached by Doc Rivers. He is 6-10 in game 7s. He is 17-33 in closeout games for his team. And if you're going to fire a guy, guys, in Adrian Griffin, who might have had some issues, who might have had some faults, who maybe didn't have the total confidence of the veterans in that locker room, who's 30-13, you're making the argument it's because we don't think he can succeed in the postseason. And that's exactly what Buck sources have told me in the last couple hours. And to turn to a guy who has a demonstrated history of not succeeding in the postseason, John, something you know emotionally, and I think if you look at the facts, we all know intellectually, actually, I don't understand it, and I absolutely hate it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. I think for me, it was reported that Adrian Griffin, had 14 different head coaching interviews throughout the league and finally landed in Milwaukee. It's also reported via Mark Stein and a bunch of other insiders that Giannis backed this hiring. He was all for it. The Bucks consulted with Giannis when they were going through the process of looking for a new head coach after firing Coach Bud. So Giannis was behind it. At some point, was no longer a believer in Adrian Griffin, and you have to really wonder why, because the Bucks are doing better this season, this time, than they were last year. Last year, they were 30-17. This year, they're 30-13. And for a team that some will argue didn't really think there was much postseason hope, obviously this was before Damian Lillard and before some of the other moves they made, you have to wonder, okay, now you're in a better position than you were last season. How do you not go ahead and give a head coach the opportunity to prove himself where it matters most? And that's in the postseason. And much to Bill's point, you then hire a coach who, for all intensive purposes, has been a failure in the postseason. I mean, Bill ran through the numbers. 13 3-1 leads blown in the NBA. Doc Rivers has the record for 3 of them. I mean, like he said, 6-10 in game 7s. The list goes on that this is not a guy who can win in the postseason. And if that is what the goal is for this team, which I think it is, especially now that you have Damian Lillard, you went ahead and filled the void of losing Drew Holiday and things like that. How do you then go ahead and hire a coach who may or may not even get you that far? It's just a very confusing situation. And I think one thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way also is Doc Rivers was available. Doc Rivers wasn't, tied to a team. It's not like he was already the head coach someplace else. He was very much available. And this is the coach that you wanted, because it seems, per a bunch of reports, that the Bucks were consulting with him as far back as December. Then why let this man coach more than half the season just to go with the coach it could have got in the first place? It just makes absolutely no sense. It's a little shady. I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way.
It's a lot shady. Yeah. I mean, to have, and as Bill said, he's gotten pushback from the Bucks that they had Doc installed as this behind the scenes advisor to Adrian Griffin, but it certainly seems like this wasn't working out well for the Bucks, because there were rumors early in the season that, especially defensively, that things were not going well under Adrian Griffin. And we've seen what happens. Yes, they moved Drew Holiday off the team, but they fall right now. They have the 22nd defensive rating in the NBA after being a team that prided itself on playing defense. And there were these rumors, these rumblings all around the league that, hey, things aren't really going well with the defense that he's implemented here. And I think, like, looking back on it now, Terry Stotts resigning as an assistant
100%.
before the season even
100%.
began had to be a clue.
Oh, it was a huge clue. And looking back, right, because I know Terry a little bit and people that are close to Terry a lot, and their view on this, right, if you sort of talk to them on background, was it was just Terry was disrespected. And he's a prideful guy, impressive guy, but also they were planning this narrative that it's not going to work. It's not going to go well. And he doesn't want to be a part of it. Look, I'm going to give you the Bucks perspective. I've talked to some folks there. I am not saying that I agree with this perspective or that we need to buy into this, but here is Milwaukee's contention for whatever it's worth. Because one of the big, let's just do real talk. Doc Rivers has a reputation for being a backstabber in the NBA. That doesn't mean that it's true. It's just true that he has a reputation with some people for being that guy. And I think the easy joke, because the Athletics reporting was he was hired as an advisor to find a path forward for Adrian Griffin. And the path forward was pushing him under a bus and then taking his job. That's the joke, right? All right. So according to people in the Bucks organization, take it or leave it, because people certainly lie. Sources certainly lie. I'll just say what I've heard. They say that Doc Rivers was never an actual official advisor in any capacity. They push back on the Athletic report, and they claim there was one meeting in Las Vegas with John Horst, who's the GM, with the now fired Adrian Griffin, and with Doc Rivers a couple days in Vegas before they actually played in that in-season tournament. They also claim that Adrian Griffin lost the locker room, that there was a disconnect before that meeting. So before, in theory, Doc Rivers got involved. And they also claim that they are going to be very, very patient with Doc, and that they're going to be very active at the trade deadline.
Okay.
Those are my sources. So I'm not sure I buy it, but I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that. But I'm just, that's what they're selling.
There's pushback for me on that. I mean, for one, I don't understand. I can understand the defensive aspect or lack thereof with Griffin, right? But I don't understand how you lose a locker room sitting at number 2 in the East. You're 30-13. I can understand there being concerns perhaps about, as the season progresses, what is our defense going to look like? There are some games we lost that I can understand all that. But to go as drastic as losing a locker room, there have been coaches with losing records that still have their locker room. So for me, it's hard to really believe that a guy that Giannis wanted, a guy that Giannis was a part of bringing into the organization, he loses that locker room with a winning record. It's very hard for me to believe.
Well, I don't think they're firing him without Giannis's permission here. Just like
I don't disagree with that either. But I also find it very hard to believe. I also find it very hard to believe that Doc Rivers just came out of left field and there was no conversations behind closed doors. This was the one and done situation. We had a meeting with, that doesn't make any sense, because also if we're going to go ahead and call a spade. Some of the other names that were thrown into the mix were Nate McMillan, Jeff Van Gundy. There are other coaches from both an offensive and a defensive right. There's other coaches from both sides of the ball, both sides of the game, offensively and defensively, that I believe would have been a better fit for this team that wants to go ahead and get better defensively, but also needs to stay top 5, top 10 offensively, especially as we go down the stretch in the season.
I think you're missing this here. I think it's an awesome hire for the rest of the Eastern Conference. Okay, I think it's really fantastic, and I wish the Bucks nothing but the best. I mean, we were talking about the kind of success or lack thereof that the Doc has had in his career. 24 seasons as a head coach. He's reached the conference finals twice. Couldn't get out of the second round with the Clippers. Couldn't get out of the second round with the Sixers. He has one title. That's as many as Rick Carlisle in 22 seasons. I like Rick Carlisle a lot. I mean, I think I'd rather have Rick Carlisle
and John,
than Doc Rivers.
You're missing. You don't forget to add the meat here. Look at the teams he's had. He had the Lob City Clippers. He had Joel Embiid, prime Ben Simmons, and didn't go to the finals with any of them. Like
10 years of 2 contenders, never made a cut. I think I read this to you guys yesterday. Can I just read that? I just want to back John up here, because this is so petty and mean, but this is a text. I think I read this to you guys the other day, but I'm going to repeat it from a rival executive when the news came out that Doc was probably going to get hired. And the other Eastern Conference contenders breathe easier. That's the main takeaway for me. Look, I like the people in the Bucks organization. I'm from that part of the country, and I root for small market teams. But Ash hit on, I think, the main overarching point. You had a colossal opportunity to hire a bunch of championship level coaches. Nick Nurse, who's doing wonders for your Sixers, was available. Frank Vogel's won an NBA championship. He's available. Monty Williams, not an NBA champion, but he coached the Suns to a championship game and a championship series, and a beloved figure was available. Now, maybe you weren't going to pay the money that obviously Detroit paid. There were options. So you go and you don't hire Nick Nurse, you hire his assistant and get it so wrong that you have to fire in 33 games, 43 games into the season, and then you hire Doc Rivers, who was available. It's also, I think, a disaster for that front office and that organization if this doesn't work out. And to me, to all of your points, other than John, who loves it for his Sixers, this is panic mode for Milwaukee. Two things can be true at once. Adrian Griffin could have been the wrong hire, and maybe it's bold to move on. But if you hire Doc Rivers, right? If I have a leaky ceiling and I got to fix it, the solution is not to burn my house to the ground. And it feels like that's what the Milwaukee Bucks have done.
That's what I'm trying to figure out here, because they're second in offensive rating. I don't think that Doc comes in and all of a sudden like supercharges an already supercharged offense, right? They're 21st in defensive rating. Is Doc like the defensive guru that's going to fix this team and get him into like the mid tiers, something like that? I mean, I've seen Doc coach in LA up close and personal with those Lob City Clippers, and then have the Sixers, right? And what I've learned about watching Doc teams is he's pretty set in his ways. He has his rotations that he likes. He doesn't really like staggering certain guys. They have their roles. He's kind of like a Tibbs, and he won't run his guys into the ground for 40 straight minutes, but he definitely has his set pieces that go like, certain parts of the game, like in the second quarter, third quarter, whatever, where guys will rotate in and out like as prescribed. He's not a flexible guy. So this looks like a situation where, despite the fact that they're second in the Eastern Conference, clearly something is going on behind the scenes that requires a remedy. And that to me would say, oh, we need somebody to come in and like figure out what's right for this team, rather than being like, this is the way I do it. This is the way I've always done it. This is the way we're going to continue to do it.
And honestly, John, I mean, I'm not so much concerned about the regular season. This Milwaukee Bucks team is going to be top 3, top 5. I'm sticking with top 3. This team will figure out a way to win in spite of Doc Rivers. I don't feel like they're going to completely go ahead and offensively. I don't think they're going to tank. I don't think you're going to see a drastic fall off from offense. They're going to be able to score points. You have Damian Lillard. You have Giannis. They're going to make that work. But what we're talking about is the postseason. We're talking about banners and championships, parades and rings. And it has been shown time and time again that if that is what your goal is of your organization, which this is the NBA, it's the goal of every organization, whether it's realistic or not, that is always the end goal. It has been shown time and time again. You go back to your 76ers, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, you go to the Lob City Clippers, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin. He is not, and by he, Doc Rivers is not the coach that is going to take you there. This is a coach we have seen blow multiple 3-1 leads. I don't understand that if this is the goal and you're in panic mode, we got to win. We got to win now. We have Dame. We have Giannis. We got to do it. We got to keep him happy. How is that your decision? He's shown you he can't take you there. It's not a mistake. It's happened time and time again. This is who Doc Rivers is. He's a good regular season coach, but when it gets down to the nitty gritty, he's not taking you to the promised land. And I don't give him this immense amount of credit for what he did in Boston. I could have coached that team and won them a championship. They were that freaking good. I take that out of the equation. He hasn't been able to do it since. He's not that guy.
I've always thought of Doc as, and this is something that I've said forever. I think that there are probably like 5 coaches in the league where you go, they're better than everybody, right? You've got Kerr and Spo and Pop and throwing a couple others, and I
would throw Nurse on that list. I wouldn't put Nurse, but I hear you.
And you go, they're better than everybody. I'll take them over everybody. And then there's 5 guys at the back of the league where you're like, man, I don't want them at all. I guess Adrian Griffin's in that category now.
Aww.
And then in the middle, there's just guys. And forever, Doc has just kind of been a guy.
I think you're being nice to Doc. I think he's a serial underachiever in the postseason who has constantly thrown people under the bus and is not viewed as authentic in a lot of his locker rooms. I do want to circle back to your defensive question, though, because there was, I don't know if you guys saw this, a post-game press conference that I think does that does show that Giannis was out on his head coach, where Giannis basically said, are we going to ever have a defensive plan? Are we ever going to make any defensive decisions? It was pretty on the nose and directed at Adrian Griffin. And I think that for Doc Rivers, if it was as bad tactically as some people think it was in Milwaukee, in terms of under Adrian Griffin and what he was doing, Doc Rivers just has to be okay for the defense to improve. I think there's going to be, to your point, Ash, I think there's going to be the illusion, this is what he does, of excellence from Doc Rivers and the Bucks, this perspective of improvement, because it might be that Adrian Griffin was just over his skis in this job. And then when we get to the playoffs and Doc Rivers gets up 3-1 with this Bucks team against anybody, it's called the Doc lock in gambling. Then you put all the money on the other team. Like, I think you're right, Ashley. It's going to be fine in the regular season. I think they're going to look really good. It's disaster, I think, that is lurking in the playoffs. But we are really the Doc Rivers fan club here, aren't we? We should send it to his publicist.
I don't have it. Listen, I have no beef with Doc Rivers.
My beef is he's not very good. Is that a beef?
It's just that I'm going to call a spade. And the spade is he's a great regular season coach. He's mediocre or less than in the playoffs. And how he continues to fall forward honestly should be studied, because it's honestly incredible. Because if this was any other coach, he would be like in the announcer booth by now, which Doc Rivers was. I don't understand why he's back.
I can answer your question how he falls forward. He gets jobs as advisors, despite what the Bucks are claiming to me.
He's a dirty macker.
He gets a job as an advisor to a young coach who's vulnerable, and then is like, here's my advice. See ya, buddy.
Very, the NBA has installed the Colangelos behind Sam Hinkie, and now all of a sudden the Colangelos are running the organization. I guess if you can get the gigs, get the gigs. The Bucks are at the Cavs. No, they host the Cavs tonight with Joe Prunty as the interim head coach before Doc Rivers takes over. By the way, second time Joe Prunty has been the Bucks interim head coach. He did this when Jason Kidd got the boot.
By the way, Doc, not shocking, but Doc Rivers won't coach tonight. Official told Doc Rivers they're not going to rush him. They're not going to rush him into Milwaukee. So Prunty gets to officially coach as an interim yet again.
One more time for Joe Prunty. We wish him Godspeed, and make sure to read Bill's piece on Doc Rivers being hired on CBSSports.com.